Good.
Okay, I'm gonna turn the camera so you can hear and see him,
Okay.
but I'm here.
Okay.
You have to you have to understand, before y'all got on, it was just Ronnie and I was on the thing, and Ronnie said about 6 times in a row, "Where's Mary Kay?" It's like, I'm not talking to you. Mary Kay's not there, right?
You didn't wave at him like, I'm right here, Ronnie. I'm right here.
So I'm in Matthew and I'm in chapter 20. And this is one that has sort of several different applications depending on what you look up and what you see. But it's, in some sense, from my perspective, it's fairly basic on a couple of things. And it's something that we all, I guess the way I could say it is, we all suffer from it, and from time to time. And it's something to remind us, again, as we talk about these, of, what's Jesus like and what God like. It's kind of remind us what, how that really works. So this is a story about the laborers going out to a vineyard. We all know this one. And it's talking about how the owner of the vineyard goes and gets laborers several times a day. He goes and gets some early in the morning, then he goes and gets some late in the morning, then around noon, then late in the afternoon, and finally at the end of the day, he pays everybody. So the framework of the story would have been very familiar to the Jews at the time. So he's talking to Jews, and his framework of somebody who owns a vineyard obviously has a lot of acreage if he has a vineyard. This isn't somebody who has a plot of land and he has a subsistence farm where he's caring for him and his family and maybe a little bit of extra to sell. This is somebody who has, think about it, a vineyard takes a lot of acres, because knows that bit. So this guy is a landowner. He may or may not be an absentee landowner. The story doesn't say anything. But the Jews at the time, and the people at the time, would have been very familiar with this picture. And anybody who has fruit trees, and I grew up across the street from an apple orchard and worked for an apple farmer, you have several times in the year when you're very, very, very busy. And then you have parts of the year where you're not busy at all. So obviously what you have is, this is harvest time, and the landowner needs a bunch of people to pick the grapes, because you have to pick them in a fairly short period of time if you want the wine to be good. So he's got people that work for him normally, but this is one of those times where, in the spring when you prune, depending on the kind of fruit you have, if you have a stone fruit, there's another period where you have to thin out the fruit. In apple orchards, you got a couple times where you have to spray and trim the trees and that kind of stuff. But in grapes, you've got the beginning and you trim everything, and then you got towards the end when you harvest. So this is probably at the very end of the harvest. They would recognize that this is a large landowner, so somebody who has money and influence. The people being hired are day laborers. So just like you see in Houston today, if there are places where, if you want somebody to come and ding out your gardens or do X or do Y for the day, you drive over to this location. You tell the guys, I need 2 or 3 guys to do X or do Y. I'm willing to pay so much for the day. Bunch of guys jump in the back of your truck, you take them over, they work for the day, you take them back. Very similar, hasn't changed in 2,000 years. So these guys are day laborers. The second thing about the day laborers is they're people at this time, they would be people that are hoping to get a job, to get enough money to, on their way home, buy food and stuff for their families. So if you think about it in terms of, they probably don't have a plot of land themselves, or if they do, it's very small. They don't have any way to get income. Either they've been displaced or they're just not in a position where they're doing okay themselves. The reason they're sitting out there is to be hired. And going home at night with some ballady bread and fruit and or whatever is all dependent on getting a job that day. Because otherwise you're going home with empty hands because you don't have any money. So these guys are looking for all day work if they can, but at least something to not be, if you will, humiliated when they go home. So the setup is landowner, day laborers, people that have money, people that are kind of desperate for just money today, if you will. Think about it. Even in Cairo, when we were there, you didn't go to the grocery store and shop for 2 weeks, put it in your refrigerator and stay home. Even we didn't do that because you had small refrigerators and the food was. So these are people that are basically buying ballady bread every day, buying fruit at the market every day, and what they can buy and what they can do and how they can support their family is basically dependent on getting a job that day. So the story is about that context, and everybody standing there would have understood the context. They would have understood the picture. And so in their head, they say, okay, I understand. So in chapter 20, chapter 20 of Matthew, Jesus starts this out. Well, right before this, Jesus is talking to the rich young ruler who says, I've done all these things. And Jesus says, hey, that's great. Sell everything you own and give it to the poor and follow me. And the rich young ruler goes, whoa, time out. That's a bit much, and goes away sad. The disciples are like, what the hey? If that's what it takes to get in the kingdom of heaven, who can get in the kingdom of heaven? And we've left everything to follow you. And Jesus kind of says, yeah, you've left everything and you'll be able to sit on thrones in heaven. So he's contrasted the disciples who have nothing and this rich young ruler who has everything by the world standards. And then he goes into this parable and he says, the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. So he's painting a picture of, you understand what I'm talking about. And now I'm going to tell you that the kingdom of heaven is like this landowner who goes out to hire laborers for the day. Now, number one, is it the landowner, for a landowner of this status and this size, is it normal for him to drive into town to pick up the laborers? No, that's what his foreman's for. In fact, he's probably not even out in the field anyway. He's back at home doing other things. He's checking the books. This isn't like me where he's out with the chainsaw doing it himself. This is, I have a manager and I'm hiring day laborers. My servants have servants. I don't even go to the grocery store. So all of a sudden, the picture Jesus is painting is already different from what they expect him to say. So he says the landowner goes to hire laborers, and when he had agreed with the laborers for a denarius for the day, he sends them out into his vineyard. So the guy's going out, let's say 6 o'clock in the morning, right at sunrise. He says, hey, I need 10 guys. 10 guys jump in the back of the pickup truck, wagon, whatever. He says, I'll pay you a denarius for the day. That is a fair wage. It's the wage that a soldier would get for a day. It's a fair wage. It's a good wage. He's made a reasonable contract. He takes, they go to the vineyard. So this is where the story then gets really weird for the people that are sitting there. He then goes in the third hour, saw other people standing idle in the marketplace and said, go into the vineyard and whatever is right, I will give you. So he didn't tell him he's going to give him a denarius, but he told him he'd pay him something fair. He's also gone back to get more folks. And if you think about it, it's like, didn't you know how many people you needed? Why are you going back? So the story's getting funny from a Middle Eastern perspective. Like, okay, number one, it's the landowner. And number two, why are you going a second time? And then it says in verse 5, again, he went at about the 6th hour and the 9th hour and did the same thing. So he goes there at 6 a.m., he goes there at 9 a.m., he goes there at noon, he goes there at 3 in the afternoon. And every time he goes, he sees people standing there and says, well, yeah, come on and work, I'll pay you. The first guys get promised a denarius, which is a full day's wage. Nobody else gets promised anything but I'll pay you fairly. Then he went in verse 6, he goes out in the 11th hour and he finds people standing around. And he said to them, why have you been standing around all day doing nothing? And they said, because nobody's hired us. So these are the guys that haven't been hired all day. They're just as desperate as everybody else to have something to go home with. He says, okay, go on out to the vineyard. I'll pay you something. So the guys, at least, from their perspective, when they get hired, even at the 11th hour, which is, like at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, everybody's quitting at 6. They have something to take home. They can at least go buy some piastre bread or something. It's a guy, and the guy said he's going to be fair with them. And it's like, hey, as long as you give me enough to buy some bread to take home, I'm not going to be embarrassed. I've been standing here all day. And you think about it, they've been standing there all day waiting to work. They didn't go home. They didn't give up at noon. 3 o'clock came. They didn't go, oh crap, I guess I'm not going to get hired today, and go home. These guys stood around all day long, hoping that they could get something to do and get paid something, so that when they went home, they had something to show for it. Now, when the evening comes in verse 8, the owner of the vineyard says to his foreman, and we all go, wait a minute. If you had a foreman, why are you doing all this work? Wait a minute, all of a sudden we have a foreman? Where'd he come from? He's the one that should have gone in and got people, and he should have gone in once at 6 a.m., gotten the people he needed, and come back. But the owner's doing all this. And he says to them, call the laborers, pay them their wages, beginning with the last group to the first. So now begin with the guys that came in at 5 in the afternoon at the 11th hour, and work your way down to the guys that came out at 6 a.m. So when those hired at the 11th hour, each one received a denarius. So guys have been out there an hour, got a day's wage. Well, now think about it. If you're the guy that's been there since 6 in the morning, what's going on in your head about this time? Yeah. He says, so then he continues to pay people a denarius as he works his way down. Everybody gets a denarius. When those hired first came, they thought they would receive more. Think about it. They've been sitting there watching who he's paying. Here's your denarius, here's your denarius, here's your denarius. They're like, I worked all day. He promised me a denarius, but he's paid them a denarius. I've been working all day. My expectation along the way is being built up here. But they thought in verse 10 they would receive more, but then each of them got a denarius. When they received it, they grumbled at the landowner, saying, these men have worked only 1 hour. You've made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the scorching heat all day. No? Do they have a point?
Mm-hmm.
They got a point.
Yeah.
But the landowner says to him, friend, I'm not doing you any wrong. Did we not agree for a denarius for the day's work? Take what's yours and goes. But if I wish to give this last man the same as you, is it not lawful for me to do what I wish with my own money? Or is your eye envious because I'm generous? And this is the part where we all get bound up. We forget that God is a generous God, generically. We forget what he's brought us out of and how everything he's done for us to get us where we are. And although we're thankful, we kind of put ourselves in a position of being entitled. Well, I'm here. I've already made it. And we forget that God has been exceedingly generous to all of us. Mm-hmm. So the question that the landowner asks is, are you envious or are you mad because I'm generous? Because in your perspective, I'm being unfair, right? It's not fair that. So you think about it, if you have this discussion with somebody who says, well, I'll be a little bit dramatic, but could Hitler be forgiven and saved? And when you get there, you find that he's in heaven. And most of us, our response is, no, and if he's there, I don't want to be there. And God's response to us would be, how is that unfair to you if I'm generous with him? And yet that is our perspective. So you see it in and when we talk about the prodigal son, you'll see that same sort of theme play for the second son. But it's okay, you're not being generous to them, you're being unfair to me. Because my perspective is, wait a minute, I served you my entire life. I was a missionary to somewhere in Africa. I've done all this stuff. I'm picking on Robin to a point. But I've done all this stuff. I've served my whole life. My father was a missionary or a pastor or whatever. And now you got this guy who's been a rotter his entire life. And at age 60, all of a sudden he gets saved. Wait a minute, this isn't fair. He ends up in heaven with the same sort of place I get to go, and he gets the same crowns I get to get. And it doesn't seem right. I've suffered all these years for you, Lord. Oh. Or think about it. One of us doesn't feel well. I use Christy as an example. Her health for years has not been wonderful. And you could see somebody else who doesn't go to church and doesn't really do anything and say, well, they're doing just fine. And they haven't had any problems. And they got a good job and good money. And it seems unfair that I'm sitting here serving you and I don't feel very good. And I'm struggling with my health over decades. So it's not generosity towards them that I see, it's unfairness towards me. And we, especially in some church examples, one I would give is some of the churches that are the prosperity doctrine churches, unless you're rich and doing wonderfully and never sick and God doesn't like you, and he's got to be generous to me, and that's too bad he's bad for you. And obviously, or you get somebody who really is like, Mighty Community Church with 40 nationalities and 60 denominations. If this is what heaven's going to be like, I'm not really sure I want to go. I only really want nice looking white people in heaven. I don't want to be sitting next to a Sudanese. He hasn't had a bath. They didn't. Right. Pick a whatever it looks like to you. It's very easy to get this mindset of, well, God's already been good to me, but I don't want him necessarily to be good to you. And that's where the Jews were at this point in time. We've talked about it. They were like, well, God loves the Jews, and all the Jews are going to heaven. All the Gentiles are not. Well, actually, God loves all the good Jews that are obeying the 600 million rules that we have and haven't made any mistakes. He likes them. So really, it's the Gentiles and the bad Jews. It's just us good Jews. Well, actually, it's just sort of, well, me and you, and I'm starting to get worried about you. Jesus is saying in this, if you go back to the very beginning, he's saying the kingdom of heaven is like this. The landowner, who's God in the story, the landowner continues to go out and bring people in. He goes out early and agrees, you can come in. He goes out late in the morning. Why don't you come in? He goes out lunchtime. What are you doing? Come on, come in. And at the end, he shows his generosity because everybody gets a denarius. And it's only the guys who came in the morning who were kind of like, wait a minute, you're being unfair to me. And God's like, no, I'm just being generous to him. You and I agreed on a wage. It's a fair wage. It's a good wage. I'm not trying to mess you out of your wage. It's a good wage. And we agreed that that was fair. I'm not being unfair to you. I'm being generous to them. And that's a condition that we quite often don't get ourselves in. And quite often we even find ourselves, even when it's sort of inadvertent, we find ourselves looking us aside and saying, why are you being so nice to him? What, God, why are you, and God's like, that's what I do. That's my job. I heard somebody say something the other day about, well, God hates these kind of people. I'm like, no, he doesn't. He may not like what somebody's doing, but God doesn't hate anybody. God is love, and he can't be any different than that. We may or may not be joining in his program, but he doesn't hate any of this. And he's constantly like this one. He's constantly going out and saying, come on, come in. No. Why have you been standing here? Well, I didn't know. All right, come on. He's basically emptying the labor market and paying everybody. And on the flip side of it, he's not only being generous, but he's honoring everybody. Because everybody can take their money, they can go buy whatever things they need for their family, and they can go home, whether they worked 1 hour or 12, they can go home and say, I have bread, I have supplies, I have food. I can provide because of the generosity of the landowner, not the foreman, the landowner. And I think that's what God tries to tell us is, don't look at this as I'm being unfair. Look at this as I'm being generous.
You guys seen The Shack? The movie?
I read the book.
Or read the book? You need to watch it, because it's a power, and Ronnie, it's a powerful movie. The Shack.
The Shack.
And in it, this person whose daughter has been kidnapped and then killed, her father is just devastated and angry, and he has an encounter with God, and they show all 3 persons in the Trinity, and they're represented really differently. God the Father is a wonderful Black woman, and God the Holy Spirit is sort of not flighty, but just this really ethereal kind of a free spirit. And then Jesus is looks like a Middle Eastern male. And God the Father is always saying, I'm especially fond of that one. And the people she's saying, I'm especially fond of, are not necessarily good, in our terms, good people. They are people who have, really fallen off and done some horrible things in some cases. But in every time, I'm especially fond of that one. And that's sort of what this reminds me of. And in the middle of the movie, he at one point in time says, I don't get it. Why are you, why is God the Father being represented as a woman? And her response is, God's response is, if I had appeared to you as a male, you wouldn't have received me the same way, and you would have been angry, and you've been able to see the compassionate side of God first, and you needed that. And then at one point in time in the movie, the character of God actually turns to a male, and he says, now you need a man. You need a stronger person, because he takes him, and I won't give away the movie. It's a powerful, powerful movie, but I'm especially fond of that one. And that's what he says about all of us. I'm especially fond of her.
Cool. It's called The Shack.
The Shack.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a movie. It's a book, but it's also a movie, and the movie's really good.
Mhm.
Yeah, I didn't see the movie. I did read the book.
Okay. So
I don't know when it was. Maybe it was in high school or college. I don't remember what, but I remember having a conversation with Dad. There was a family that was dealing with a member that was dying, and he wasn't a follower, very hurtful, very, just a lot of conflict in the family. And, dad was there when he was passing, and, he accepted Christ before he took his last breath. And that was just really hard for the family to accept. Like, it didn't count because he never lived as a follower. And, so that was really hard for dad to explain that. And it's just like this, it's just like this story. So I remember that. I mean, I don't remember the details, but I do remember that conversation of that family just being so mad, that he did it at his last breath, basically. And, it was the unfairness. It was, we never was able to receive the good. If he ended up good, like we never got that, and, God has forgiven him, but have we? And is that fair? So, that's
Yeah,
just,
instead of rejoicing that, oh my goodness,
yeah, like I get to see him again, right? I
Yeah.
get to see him again in heaven now, this
Right.
isn't a final goodbye, I'm gonna be united with this family member again.
Well, and think about it. The other picture of that is the thief on the cross, right?
Right,
Mhm.
Today you'll be with me in paradise.
right.
Yeah. And do we have, does our heart break for what breaks his? Are we compassionate?
Mhm.
Do we really, Lord, let me see with your eyes? Because if I'm looking with your eyes, then I can look past some of the hurts or the ugly behaviors or whatever and see that this is a person who needs you.
Right.
And how do I, who have been rescued, bring the good news? My brother tells a story. There's a priest and a minister after World War II. And they were in Germany. They were in Nuremberg during the Nuremberg trials after World War II. They had both liberated concentration camps, so they knew exactly what the Germans had been doing. And they ministered to a German prisoner at that point in time being tried, who was called the Butcher of Poland.
Mhm.
And he had been, horrible, horrible atrocities that he had done. But these two men continued while this guy's in jail being tried, and he's finally hung for his crimes. But they continue to witness to this man, and this man becomes a believer. And his last, his dying breaths, our Lord, forgive me. And I know when my brother said he was reading the story for the first time, he's like, that's not fair. No, God, no, he deserves to get, that's just wrong. But these two men continued to just share every day with this guy. And, heart was changed. And that's what God's doing with every single one of us. And then once you're saved, it's not, okay, great. Now I can just relax and sit back and wait for heaven to come. No, you're supposed to rescue people, go rescue people. They tell other people about good news. They tell people how good he is, and come join us, come to youth group.
I think that's the message that I kept saying in this is too, that, God keeps circling back. He keeps circling back, looking for more, looking for us, looking for the people that he is missing. It's,
And he's missing all of us.
right.
He desires no man to perish. He takes no delight.
Right. That's what I see. That's because he finally got everybody that was there.
Right.
Mhm. Yeah.
Right. There's a guy who's written a book, and he's like, what if somehow, obviously, theologically, it might get kind of weird, but what if God in the end robs Satan of every single person who should be in hell?
Wow.
What if he is able to bring back every single person? You're like, wow, okay,
Mm.
don't know. But, does my heart break for what breaks his? Not always.
Not always.
Yeah.
Christy was talking the other day about Moses on the mountain, and he's up getting the 10 Commandments, and God goes, the people are down there building a golden calf, and God threatens to, wipe them all out, and destroy them. And he says, I'll start over with you. We'll make a new people, And Moses could have thought, that's really cool. I'm going to be the new Abraham. And in pride gone, wow, that'll be me that's the head of this thing. And that's not Moses's response. It's not, okay, great. Get rid of these people are a pain in the neck. I'm a great, start over with me. And it's almost like God's testing him. Do you care? Do you have my heart? Will you love this people? And Moses intercedes for the people, and God does not kill them. And he does not start over. And Moses continues to, lead this rebellious group of people. But again, it's like, okay, Moses's heart was for these people, regardless of what they were doing down there. Oh, no, you can't do that.
Mm.
Move the screen. There he is.
Keeps moving the computer on me.
I do.
When our
Well, you
kids,
can't.
when our kids were younger, we were in a couples study, and we did focus on the family. It's called Tool Chest, and it just has neat little activities and sometimes science projects to help bring a biblical concept. And this was on fairness, and Ted was leading it. And I think there were 5 kids, two of ours, 3 of a couple. And he took each child separately and said, you are so special. This is for you. And he gave them between $0.25 to like $2 or something. And to each one of them is special. This is special. Don't tell him this is special. And then we did a lesson, and then they got to share what Ted gave them. And what they saw was that, Kendra only got $0.25, but M got $2. Why? That's unfair. But at that moment, it was, oh, $0.25. You know what I mean? That it was just so valuable to her. But then when she saw her friend get the $2, that was just not. But it's, I'm not saying that Ted was wagering people on their specialness. It was just at that moment, right then, that was special and enough for you. But then when somebody gets something more, it's a jealousy thing, an envy thing, not you being generous. So, yeah. So that was
a cool way to put it. Either you're unfair or you're being generous to others, and it changes your perspective.
It does. It does. Yeah.
Well, we even do it within the church of his gift is more special than mine.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it.
Yeah.
Whether he's the pastor and he's an amazing preacher, or the music minister who just can play 7 instruments, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We look and compare. God doesn't. It's not unfair. He's just given different gifts to different people.
Right. And not that your gift isn't valuable. You might not see the end product right away, but that gift is planting a seed, and you never know how much it's going to flourish later on. You just don't see it.
Or how much that particular gift is
meaningful to you, right? Or how it's going to minister to somebody. Yeah.
We need all of the gifts. And so if I get mad because my gift doesn't look like as much fun as your gift, the whole body misses out on the fact that, okay, well, that person just took their gift and went home. So now we don't have that gift at all anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And we need all of them,
the body of Christ, right?
Body of Christ, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. With one arm, I'm less useful, or I can do less than I can if I have both of them. And so when we decide that we're going to walk off with part of the body and go, never mind, I'm not going to be, we miss out on what they've got to give us and what they've got to share with us.
Yeah. And I think my kids learned that the best when they went on a mission trip. And they were helping this lady with her trailer, just falling apart, just in shambles. She hardly had anything. But she became friends with these, teenagers that were helping to improve her home. And, she didn't have much money at all. And the last day, she went out. They don't know how she got to town, but she got to town and she came back with popsicles. And, kind of was like, I was almost in tears because I knew how much those popsicles cost. And yet she did that for all of us, what little she had, that little, I wouldn't say it's a gift, just generosity that she had, and just how much it meant so much to them, that she just gave what little she had just for them, and, they're sweating that whole week trying to help her out. And, they know that they're doing her a good thing. And, and they just hope that they're ministering just as much as that popsicle. So
Mhm.
it's
But
just,
then we have to be careful that we don't rob somebody else of the gift that they want to give and go, oh, no, I
Yeah,
can't accept that.
exactly.
You
Yeah.
have to accept.
exactly. That's the one thing that Jacob said, it was hard to take that popsicle, but she was ministering to us and we need to be thankful, and bless her for doing that
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
and not overlook it, right?
Mhm.
Right.
Like you said, not rob her is what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you can stop recording.
Okay.